I call to order the meeting of the Rules Committee for August 30th, 2021. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome staff and commissioners. Ms. Casco, can you note who we have in attendance today?
I have, thank you.
Wonderful. All right, Mr. Davis, you're up. Take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. Esther, can we share the slide deck?
I think Deborah has the slide deck. Where's Deborah? She's on.
I'm doing it. Hold on.
Thank you.
Come on. 1 second. It was there.
Take your time, no worries. Zoom technology is not always the most obvious thing in the world, so there we go.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So as usual, for this committee meeting, we will start with a legislative position overview, and that will be conducted by Abe Hajela, Caitlin Jung, and Nick Romley from Capital Advisors Group. Next slide, please. So the topics for today's legislative overview are the gubernatorial recall election, expanded learning as outlined in current legislation, independent study, broadband access, and then finally an update on the status of bills that were introduced in 2021, where we are with those right now. So having said that, I'd like to turn it over to Abe.
Great, thanks, Mike. We'll try to do this reasonably quickly here and then save the majority of our time for questions or comments from all of you. So on the recall election, I'm not sure if I have anything more exciting to say other than, here in Sacramento, the impact has been that almost nothing has gotten done for weeks, because anything that could be remotely considered political, there's been a hold on it, and all we just keep hearing is, wait till after the election and we might be able to address that. And so, with the major issues involved with school reopening, when they had not anticipated the Delta variant doing what it's doing, and had thought to put into place a scheme that disincentivized anything but in-person learning, and then we get here and we find out we have different needs, and basically the legislature is paralyzed, and the governor, because they're preoccupied with the recall election. So we here will be happy to see this thing finished, so we can actually, it's chaotic enough here without it, and with it, it's been just completely unmanageable. So, the latest we are hearing from, the campaigns insiders, they do their own polling and everything. It appears as if Governor Newsom is in better shape this week than he was in last. His folks are feeling a little bit better about it. They're releasing more polls that say he should be okay. Those who are doing the political betting say he's got about a 3-to-1 chance of pulling it off. But, remember, all of this stuff there's so many games within the games. They might just be releasing this as an attempt to change the narrative, right, and create some momentum. So lots of uncertainty still on the recall. So I don't really have anything else to add other than that. Does anyone else have any comments they want to make? Okay, then let's go on to the issue area subjects, which we've got listed here, and we'll talk about those. Just before we jump into that, big picture, where are we? We're very close to the end of the legislative session, so we will at the end here talk about bills, but most of the oxygen in the room is being sucked up by circumstances changing since the budget bill was written. And so a lot of focus here is on what we're calling budget bill cleanup. I don't think it's really technically cleanup. It's, we need to rewrite some things that were maybe incorrectly written. But that's the big subject. So with that, let me go into each issue area. So Caitlin's going to talk a little bit about expanded learning and then take any questions you have.
Yeah, okay. So just in general about expanded learning, there's about $1.7 billion provided for this expanded learning, where you're supposed to offer a total of combined 9 hours of instructional and after school, before school time to starting with unduplicated pupils and kind of as the program goes out to all K through 6 students. So under this program, those with above 80% unduplicated, they get about $11.70 per unduplicated kid to provide this additional after school, before school time. And then the remaining LEAs that have 80% or lower unduplicated percentages get the remainder of the funding split across them on a per ADA basis, with them getting at least every LEA getting at least $50,000. CD does not yet have a per ADA amount for those LEAs that fall at 80% or below unduplicated. They're still working out that calculation. In terms of when the funding's kind of rolling out, CD's expectation is that this funding, you get a special appropriation in the fall, and then they made about 55% of what you're entitled to get under this program, you get that in the fall, and then the remaining 44% would go out in 21-22 P1 and P2 apportionments beginning in February of 2022. And then as the program is expected to expand over the years with increased funding, that funding will roll out the way principal apportionment normally rolls out. In terms of what is required in 21-22, if you're 80% or below, you have to offer it to all your unduplicated K through 6 students and serve at least 50% or provide opportunities for at least 50% of those unduplicated students to participate in these programs. Going to CDE, there is an expected ramp up period. So it's not the expectation that the first day you're serving this full 50%, but that you have to build up the capacity to meet the 50% enrollment target. So they also focus on the fact that it's about enrollment in the program and not just if you're serving the 50%. So if you can have 50% meet that target of enrollment, but maybe you're only serving actually 20% of those kids, you're still deemed as being in compliance, because it's really focused about having the ability to serve 50%, whether or not you actually are serving. Because again, this is a voluntary program that you can't require kids to participate in, and parents can't say no to. So there's that kind of juxtaposition of having to meet this target, but understanding that it's a voluntary program. There's also a special accommodation for 21-22 around how you meet this target, where you can now also count ACES or 21st century slots towards this 50% for this 21-22 school year. In the out years, you will no longer be able to count those slots, but in the beginning years, kind of to help meet this target, you're allowed to count those kids you're serving through ACES or 21st century also as towards this 50%, so you don't have the programs kind of fighting against each other as they get built out. So that's kind of a general review of this program. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions about what's required or any additional details they want.
And the comment on this sort of a big picture, the reason why we wanted to cover this one is it's sort of with all of the efforts to deal with school reopening and in-person versus independent study and kids being quarantined and all of that stuff, contact tracing, it's easy to lose track of this one, but this is a requirement for this year. And as Caitlin described, understanding all the pressure you're under, they've provided some amount of flexibility, but while you're doing everything else you're doing, the plan was to dramatically expand learning time for K through 6.
So in terms of process, I'm wondering if we can do clarifying questions from the board for each of these, and then go through them all, and then have public comment, and then we can have some further board discussion if there's decisions we need to make, if that's okay. So do board members have questions about that program? I do have one, which is, what is the distinction between this and ACES and 21st century, like the existing kind of extended learning programs? Is it, I guess I heard what you said about how it's going to phase in, but how is it similar and different?
So it's fairly similar to ACES. A lot of it's modeled after this, a lot of the same requirements around like staffing ratios, whether you can charge fees and things like that are similar to ACES programs. The difference is that the funding source is not coming from the proposition, which is in talking with the administration legislature is a lot more restricted in what you can use it for and things like that. So this, like their idea is like using more state funding, general funding that's not tied to the proposition requirements, that there's a little more flexibility in what they can spend it with. I think the understanding is also that as this program ramps up, there might be some changes coming to ACES in the sense that the expanded learning really is focused right now on K through 6. So maybe when you look at ACES, if they think about, oh, we change what that focuses on, so there's not an overlap, because there is concern if you have both operating, serving the same group of kids, there's going to be overlap. Some kids are going to be pulled from ACES that impacts that program. So they are, in terms of like requirements and operating, they're similar, but the different funding sources allows additional flexibility on what the expanded learning programs can do compared to what ACES is allowed to do.
That's helpful. And part of the reason I ask is because in San Francisco, we already have, out of school time programs, we have ACES programs, like we already have kind of like a mix of different after school programs for elementary coming from different funding sources. And so, which already creates confusion. And I don't know if it still exists. At some point we had schools with 2 programs. And so that was kind of the, I don't know if there's any thought in this at the state of trying to actually streamline this in any way, but.
And one of the concerns really was, because it's a great question, one of the concerns was this idea of they wanted to dramatically expand the program, but many districts that had done a good job already had, the uptake that they were going to get from their parents and students. And so it's great to offer it, but there's requirements in this bill, not only to offer, but to also apparently to provide, right? There's some ambiguity in the language. And what we were sort of saying is, wait a second, if we offer it to everyone and we don't have 50% of the people want to take us up on it, then what, so, yeah.
And do we have a sense of how much money SFUSD will get for this, or is that not clear yet?
No, we do know, like if you're at the above 80%, because it says in the bill how much you get per ADA, because the idea was trying to give additional funding to those with a higher concentration. But below, CD does not yet have that calculation. It's kind of difficult because the bill guarantees everyone gets at least 50,000, but there's like, they have to take up the remaining funding and kind of figure out how they want to ensure everyone gets 50,000, but also do a per pupil amount. And when I reached out to CDE, they had not yet reached an amount for those that are 80% or below.
So we're working on that. Our hope is that it'll be close to $1,000 per kid, but honestly, we have no idea. So we're waiting for CDE to run those numbers.
So 1.75 billion went towards this program. About $1 billion of that is going to the higher concentration districts, leaving about 700 million kind of to go spread out across every other LEA. But again, determining how CD has a little bit of discretion of how they want to reach the numbers and ensure everyone gets the money they're supposed to. So there's still, from when I reached out to them last week, they're still working out the final details of that.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's do independent study.
So an independent study, I mean, there's a million things we could talk about here. So I don't want to rehash everything that you've already been through, and the district has made its efforts to serve as many kids as you can through this program. The challenge, of course, was the state didn't want to they didn't want to call it distance learning. Again, this is the recall politics coming in. So that's a bad word. So we got to call it something else. Well, let's just fit it into independent study. But independent study traditionally was never about this sort of thing, particularly short term for like quarantines and things. So it's a tough marriage, between the independent study program as it existed, all of these modifications we've made, and then trying to have it do a lot of different work. Some for parents that have decided that their kids should, stay in that program perhaps for the whole year, and others for kids that are just in for short periods of time. So we are waiting for, whatever cleanup or new language we're going to get from the legislature and the governor in the next couple of weeks here. But here's the wild card. I mean, we're not expecting too much, to be honest. They're going to tinker with this a little bit, but what we keep hearing is that the reason why AB 130 was a bit of a mess as it is, and the cleanup conversation is a bit of a mess, is that the legislature, the staff in the legislature and the governor's folks just aren't in the same place on what they want this option to be. So generally speaking, I would say both the legislature and the governor were interested in incentivizing in-person education for this school year and avoiding too many people going to distance learning. But none of them really thought through what they were going to do if something like this happened with the Delta variant. And so they just didn't think about it. And now they're not on the same page about what to do to fix it. So what we're hearing is that they may not fix it much at all. The fix might be that they create a little bit of flexibility by essentially saying, well, we're not going to penalize any of you. So do the best you can. You may not be able to meet our crazy rules related to independent study. And, you know, when you have to quarantine kids, you're just going to have to quarantine them for public safety reasons. And what would happen under the normal rules is you would lose your ADA for all those kids, right? Because you don't qualify for independent study. What we're hearing is as long as you have a plan for independent study, like you have a plan for what you're doing for kids when they're on quarantine, from Department of Finance's perspective, they're not going to come back and try to take the money from you. And they're willing to let folks use whatever process is developed, whether it's the J13 sort of emergency process or whatever it is, to ensure people don't lose ADA. So that's not fair. That's not very satisfying, but I think that's the best we're going to get, is you're not going to be penalized for doing the best you can, because they're not going to fix the law by December 10th, in my opinion. Not December, sorry, September 10th. So I don't know,
Thanks.
Nick or Caitlin, if you have additional views, but that's what I know.
Commissioners, questions on that?
I guess I just wonder, and I know we'll probably hear from the public too, but is there anything written that we need to follow in this instance to protect us if this comes back, as far as like even our documentation of students who are isolated and what we're doing to support them while they're learning from home, things like that? Any guidance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the problem is that agencies don't feel like they're authorized to give guidance until the law changes, and the law's not changing. And so we're getting, I've never heard this before. We were being told by folks both in the legislature and in finance, they were telling us things verbally, like go out and tell your clients we're not going to come after them for their money and stuff. And they would normally tell us that and say, don't tell anyone. Now they're saying, look, I can't put it in writing. I'm not authorized to or whatever, but please go out and tell people. So it's a great question. We're in this odd place. Maybe we'll get a little more clarification than I think by September 10th. And then after September 14th, I feel like at least the agencies that are under the governor's control will feel a little bit more authorized. But right now, I think everybody in Sacramento is fearful of, if they say too much, they'll be accused of going back to distance learning, which is what they were trying to avoid in the first place. So not terribly satisfying, I know, but I feel like here's what the big picture, my view on this is, nobody in the state is able to comply with all these rules. So if they did try to penalize everyone, all they would do is take money away from every district in the state. It just reverts back to Prop 98 anyway, and it has to go back out to you again. So it's this odd thing about, there's not really even any incentive for the state to try to take this money back. So I think to more specifically to answer your question, I think document everything you're doing to provide services to kids, and that's the best you can do. And so I would say, yeah, keep as much documentation as you can there. And I think the more we can do to serve kids under these challenging times, the better. And to the extent that we can demonstrate that, it'll be helpful.
Right. And the last thing I'll add to that, just to bring up to my colleagues, is with that documentation piece is recognizing how much of that will fall on educators. And if they know they need to kind of keep track of this and store it somewhere. So I think it'd be on the district to really convey that message to them, to everyone.
Thanks, President Lopez. Other questions on this one? Great, and we already passed our policy change so that we're in line. We have a board policy now that's in line with the law, but yeah, this kind of came up at that discussion, and I think there was acknowledgement that perhaps there would be some challenges, but yeah, we're just kind of waiting. So thanks for that update. All right, broadband access. And then after that, we'll do public comment after we talk about this one.
Great. Okay, so Nick's going to do a little summary on this one, and then happy to take questions again.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everybody. Happy to be here. Good to see you all. Just as Abe said, want to provide kind of a quick overview of where we are in Sacramento on some of the major broadband proposals and the current universe around. Basically, three kind of major pieces. So I'll start by highlighting, it's kind of, I'll go in chronological order, if you will. Senate Bill 156, many of you may know at this point, this was the budget trailer bill that kind of implemented a $6 billion broadband package in California. And it has a lot of minutia in it, so I won't go through all of it, but the major provisions I think are relevant for us here are keep in mind this $6 billion is intended to go out over 3 years. A lot of this money was freed up from the general fund, and instead they use ARP dollars, right? A lot from the federal stimulus. And the more than half of the money appropriated per SB 156 is $3.25 billion going towards a state middle mile infrastructure, is what you're calling it. It was explained to me as, think of middle mile as like I-5 and, you know, I-680 and all these versus surface streets are kind of last mile. We keep hearing the two different terms, right? So there are still parts of the state, large parts of the state, that are unserved by the major pipelines that get the overall broadband access to even allow locals to connect to some type of broadband internet access. So $3.25 billion for that could be administered by the CPUC, Department of Technology, kind of all working together to try to identify these regions across the state. And then another big portion, most of the rest of the money is a $2 billion appropriation, $1 billion each for that last mile connectivity. And it's split $1 billion and $1 billion for what they're calling rural and urban sectors of the state. So this is again to try to, okay, now you've got the big pipe into your region, but now let's go ahead and try to connect those smaller institutions, local education agencies, you know, households, businesses, hospitals, things like that. And they have put in a lot of the kind of more updated bandwidth requirements that, you know, one of the things we were hearing, and I know you all in San Francisco have heard too, is that sure, I may have connectivity, but it's just not enough. It's not enough for when I have 3 kids trying to do distance learning, or at this point, independent study, and I've got, you know, my husband's trying to do a Zoom or whatever, you know, whatever it is. So they're trying to they updated some of those standards, minimum 25 megabits downstream and 3 megabits up is just the threshold to try to define unserved for last mile purposes. That was a big push in an effort last year that did get into SB 156 this year. And then the last piece of the budget deal was a $750 million appropriation for what they're calling a loan loss reserve account. This is to try to help local agencies that want to get into providing broadband locally for their folks to get kind of almost like seed money, if you will, to help with opening costs, maybe bond financing, things of that nature. And again, this just was signed at the end of July. So the CPUC, other entities that are involved in governing over this just now are starting to put out their projections and things for public comment and things of that nature. So a lot of this still to be sorted out in terms of actual implementation, but those are kind of the major pieces of the budget deal. And so as Abe said, I have a couple more things I want to talk about, happy to take any questions after that. The other 2 major pieces in the broadband discussion are 2 bills which we have brought before you guys before, as Senate Bill 4 and Assembly Bill 14. The Assembly Bill is authored by Assemblywoman Cecilia Aguiar Curry. She's from the Yolo County region. And the Senate bill is authored by Senator Elena Gonzalez. She's from the Long Beach region. Both, now that the budget deal has come together, both bills are seeking to kind of address connectivity and broadband projects in a longer term sense, because many of you might be saying $6 billion is great, it's a lot of money, but 3 years and it's gone. I mean, what are we going to do after that, right? So and we've been working closely with staff in the senator's office and in the Assemblywoman's office, and the idea here, they now have amended these bills to primarily deal with replenishing and keeping the California Advanced Services Fund operating and funded. Some of you may know this is we call it the KSIF. This is the major fund underneath the CPUC that helps fund state-funded broadband projects across California, right? And so current law, the fund was going to expire at the end of 2022. I believe it is, I'd have to double check, but it was set to expire. And these bills are seeking to extend that, reauthorize the fund for another 10 years. So it would go through 2032. And it would set in statute an allowable collection of up to $150 million a year. And the idea here again is like, okay, let's say we get to the end of this major investment and you still have a couple of these projects that are like almost there, but not quite there. How does the state make sure that we continue to close those last mile problems, get everyone that we can connected? And you know, in the words of some staff I was talking to, we'd look pretty silly if we put all this money into it and we still had, you know, a bunch of households in some of these regions not connected. So kind of again, looking at longer term, how do we make sure we continue to update and modernize broadband across California? And again, those at Senate Bill 4 and Assembly Bill 14, those just passed the appropriations committees on Thursday last week. They are now pending before both houses of the legislature. And politically on this, both the senator and Assemblywoman have mentioned they are working hand in hand together on this. What that means, whether we end up with one bill or we end up with two bills that have what we call double joining language, where they say one cannot pass without the other, unclear at this point, but always a good news when you have members working together, because you know sometimes you can get last minute fighting of who gets the bill, if you will, right? So we're happy to hear that. And the one other thing I'll mention, and then happy to take any questions, is I know it's been brought up before this board. Affordability is one of the biggest problems, and unfortunately, I don't see anything addressing that as of yet. I will say, as Abe mentioned too, education gets a cleanup bill, everything gets a cleanup bill, right? So whether they put something for affordability in there, unlikely, because you have to have agreement, unfortunately, for an omnibus bill. Otherwise, you can pull things out. But I will say that both the senator and Assemblywoman were present when the governor signed the budget bill. So, and that question was asked specifically, you know, this is great, but what are we doing about families that have access but can't afford better access or more access, or just can't afford access at all? And one of the members commented that we know, quote, you know, I shouldn't say quote, I know we have more to do, and we're coming back to Sacramento in August. At the time the bill was signed in end of July, so we're looking into that. That was basically what they said. So unclear if something specifically addressing affordability gets in this year. But I know that it's top of mind for some of these members, and I know they're hearing it from their constituencies because we've been told as much as we've been working with them. So that's kind of what I wanted to highlight. The good news is these bills are moving, and there's pretty broad support, including I know SB 156, the budget bill, passed the Assembly for 71-0. So, you know, there's I think people have recognized, and members have recognized, we need to do something about this. So happy to take any questions, and I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Nick. Commissioners, questions on that? Go ahead, Commissioner Lynn.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Nick, for the thorough update. I think I've raised this before, but maybe you can provide some context to of the access of these various investments, like ultimately who's the grantee or the recipient? Is it service providers, or is it trying to grow capacity of local municipalities to partner up with school districts? Because I would say right now school districts don't have the capacity, right? I mean, we're very fortunate to have a very robust technology division, the small and mighty tech team, but we also have been able to partner with our local municipality, with our city and county around just looking at different strategies. So I'm just curious because we know that truly when we either talk about middle mile, last mile, like the service providers have a huge piece and stake and really the future and sustainability of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question. I think the answer, as with many of these things in Sacramento, is it's a little bit of both. I think, for example, the loan loss reserve account is really a way to try to help local municipalities, local governments, and local agencies generally, whether it's a hospital or a library, an LEA, get off the ground with last mile broadband projects. As you know, we hear, especially in some of the more rural regions, you have folks who are like, listen, we've got the will, we have the people who want to do it, but we can't get the financing set up or whatever it may be. So I think that's a piece of it. But I think obviously providers will have a stake in this, especially in the last mile regions. I know there is an effort by the California Cable and Telecommunications Association right now. They're concerned with some of the language around identifying priority areas for middle mile for this 3.25 billion. So they certainly will have a stake in this. The program itself, at least for that middle mile, is going there. The bill also established the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy under the California Department of Technology. And I think that the goal here is going to be having them work with CPUC to try to oversee this deployment of this infrastructure. But there's no question that the major telecoms in California are going to play a part and will be, I don't want to say eligible necessarily, but I know they'll be playing a part in this. And I would be shocked if they end up not being eligible. I don't think there's anything in the bill that precludes them from participating. And in fact, the fact that they're trying to be so involved at getting some what they're calling last minute cleanup to some of this is, I think, their signal that we're going to be involved in this. So whether that's the middle mile or it's just that $2 billion for the last mile or whatever else they may want to be part of is unclear. But I know that they'll be involved, particularly I think in the last mile, based on what I've been reading from their the piece they had put out on their concerns with the project. So I know that's kind of a little bit of word salad, but I hope that's helpful. It's a lot of this is happening right now as we're talking today. I mean, I just saw something from the CPUC on like August 15th that just came out about what does the public think about, is it reasonable to assume that areas with less than 100 megabits per second download, it can be considered unserved, right? Then there's concern that you're going to leave all the 25 threes behind, right? So they're trying to work this out now. I think they're taking some public comment as we speak, but that's kind of where we're at on who's the grantees, who can participate, who can't.
Yeah, I think with that, just again to reiterate, the affordability issue to us is really key for our families because we do have somewhat of a more infrastructure, right? Living in an urban environment. Our challenge is that we don't have the same type of coverage. Let's say maybe in a rural area, you might have one provider that can cover that region. But for us, like we have certain neighborhoods that have been, consistently just very challenged because of satellite or whatever, it just doesn't reach. And so I think for just curious too, if there's any of that analysis happening at the state level to understand what types of technology is needed, because that would be a breakdown between the urban and rural. And then that gets to my question then how do we as a school district, work with, for example, our city and county to get that most affordable and leverage the most of those resources so that our students can get the speeds that they need and they're in that, basically into the household.
Yeah, there's certainly that analysis going on in Sacramento. I can tell you again, as working with the authors on a couple of these bills, that they know affordability is a big problem. For example, the Senator Gonzalez, she's from Long Beach, LA, that region. I mean, probably facing similar problems you are in San Francisco, which, yes, we've actually got okay infrastructure in most of our cities and most of our communities, but a lot of people can't afford it. It's just too expensive or whatever it may be. So I know it's top of mind up here. Again, I think where they're going to have a bit of an issue is simply timing. I mean, 2 weeks is not much time at this point to get a bill like that through. That being said, I also know that there have been some federal efforts. I think, an infrastructure bill may play a part in this. I think that they, at least for the school side of it, I know that the FCC just reopened another window for the emergency connectivity fund. The initial one had just expired, but it looks like there's still, I think I saw about 1.7 or so billion dollars left. I'd have to double check that number. And so they're encouraging folks to apply for that again for the remaining amount. California applied for a huge amount of what was applied for, which makes sense. It's usually about, I think the state makes about 10% of all applications for this type of stuff. So in a nation of 50 states, it's a pretty significant amount of money. But that being said, there are still places that have not. And so I think, especially given that there's some looseness around the fact that even though it's E-rate and things like that, you can use it for stuff in the home, for student devices that go home with them, things like that. I think that's one piece of it too, trying to reduce costs elsewhere, for lack of a better term, that might help families. A family maybe trying to decide, do we buy a laptop or do we, those kind of things is what I might imagine some would say to try to get at affordability. And I think there is some leeway in there for service as well. So I think those are the pieces that are currently active, but I do know that it's something they want to do. It's just if they can in 2 weeks, I'm not sure.
And just one last comment, sorry, but just to reiterate, like, for example, as our district, we've set a policy because of equity is an issue that, we've been giving out, lending over 50,000 laptops, plus the well over 10,000 now, I think, hotspots, even though we know that's not a long-term solution because of the speed that is needed. But just wanted to raise that, there are school districts like ours that are paying millions of dollars now, right, on an annual basis. And so if we can, again, leverage either E-rate or some of these other funds that goes back to the LEA, then it would just also, again, benefit that student accessibility.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Lamb. Are there other questions on this? Okay, if not, let's pause here and do public comment. And for the three members of the public who are here, let's see if any of them want to comment. And feel free to comment on any of these items that you've just heard about, as well as any other state legislative areas. There's in board docs, there is a document posted on the first agenda item, which is called Bill List. And it has a list of the bills that we've taken positions on, I believe. And so if you have comments on those also would be fine, or questions during public comment that we as board members can also follow up on. So let's see if anyone.
There is one hand raised, and how many minutes?
Let's go ahead and do 2 minutes.
2
Thanks,
minutes,
Ms.
okay.
Yeah.
The hand raised, Michelle Jacques-Menegas.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Esther, and thank you, commissioners and everyone present. I'm Michelle Jacques-Menegas. I'm the coordinator for the Parent Advisory Council to the Board of Ed. And I do really just want to appreciate the district's advocacy on the part, especially that was just discussed, getting the technology into the hands of our students that need it in order to be able to fully participate in their learning, whether it be a device or connectivity. And I just want to extend that to the fact that many of our volunteer parent leaders in our advisory groups also need that kind of support. And then thank you, Commissioner Alexander, because I did want to just make a couple quick comments about some of the bills on the list. First of all, I noticed there's a lot of stuff about mental health supports. And I just want to really, really, really appreciate that, both that it's happening at the state level, and that there's support here. And I know there is at the local level, especially for, there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. One is modifying the excused absence policy so that students, it includes mental and behavioral health reasons, in addition to physical health reasons for approved absences, and just additional funding and services. And then the other piece that really stood out to me, and I know that this is one that is on the watch list, and it looks like it's failed its deadline and may be acted upon in the coming year, but it's around dyslexia screening. And then the bill would require every student in the third grade to be screened, and then to those that are identified as having potential challenges with dyslexia could be supported. I can't speak highly enough about how vital that is. Both of my students who are now out of SFUSD would have benefited greatly from many of the mental health supports and the dyslexia screening. So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. There are no more speakers, Mr. Chairman. No
Thank you,
hands
Ms.
raised.
Casco, and thank you, Ms. Menegas, for your comments. Yeah, and I know we talked the mental health bills that she mentioned. I know that we talked about those last time or the time before, and so yeah, we're definitely taking a position in support of those. So Abe, did you want to follow up on any of these bills?
Yeah, I'm not sure we need to. I mean, if there are specific questions, we're really at the end of the session here, and almost all of the major things were incorporated in one way or the other into the budget. So there are a few things sort of hanging out there with legislation still, but most of these major pieces, as you know, in the budget, there was a lot of funding for mental health services and programs and counselors and those sorts of things. Some of that money flowing through school agencies, a lot of money flowing through, Health and Human Services, et cetera. So I don't think we need to revisit much on this list unless somebody wants to, pull a bill out and we can chat about it.
Great, well, let's check with my fellow commissioners. Does anyone want to have comments or questions about any of these bills? I will take that as a no. Okay, thank you so much, Abe and Caitlin and Nick. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move to the second portion of our meeting where we will be discussing some proposed new board policies. Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Or actually the slide after the next slide. So we have two board policies for your review. They were both introduced to the board on June 22nd. That qualifies as introduction and first reading. And of course, they were referred to this committee for review before they go back to the board for adoption. And so having said that, Chief General Counsel Houck is here, and we have a description of the policies and some background on each for you to review.
Great, thanks, Mike. Commissioner Alexander, I don't know if you would like me to go into anything more than is in the background, or if you have specific questions, or if you wanted to discuss some of your more general questions that I know we've been trading emails about in terms of how do policies end up here.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I don't know if there was further emails because I've been running around all day, so I haven't So I don't have that context, just FYI. But I think what would be really helpful is understanding sort of why these policies are necessary. I mean, I think we can read them and you've provided a really good summary. I think I feel like maybe I'm missing a little bit is the context as to like why they need to be adopted now.
Yep, totally. So in general, let me give some context for sort of how policies get to your agenda. So when I joined the district, which I think was 6 years ago, but it may have been longer, I came in and there were our state of our policies were in pretty bad shape in terms of they needed to be updated, they weren't online, and it was hard. There are literally hundreds of policies that CSBA recommends to school districts. So we really took a look at it and said, well, where do we start with something like this? Because it's not like we got new or more staff to address it. So in general, what we do is we use CSBA's guide sheets that come out quarterly or 3 times a year. And what CSBA does for us, we pay for this service. They review laws as they're updated in the education code. And then they make suggested changes to board policies and they communicate that to us. So one thing we decided was as these laws update policies, we're gonna either revise our policies or, as is more often the case, we're gonna bring that new policy to the board because that's a moment when the law has changed and we're gonna use that to get our policies into compliance. So that's one way that you see policies. The other way is sometimes we'll have staff bring them to us and say, hey, we really need a policy on CTE. And then the third way is, we notice something is happening in the district that we really need to address through a board policy. So a couple examples of that, several years ago, we did professional boundaries, and that was in response to a pattern that we were seeing, and we knew we needed to get a clear policy statement. So in general, that's sort of how we approach it. So when CSBA issues these updates, we take a look. Some obviously don't apply to us, but we take a look and try to prioritize what needs to come forward and what we can handle basically with our workload. So for these 2 policies, the reason that we tried to get these on as the law was changed, one, I mean, infectious diseases, in a COVID pandemic, although this isn't specific to COVID, we thought it was important that we get our policy on the books around working with Department of Public Health and clarifying our expectation that they're going to notify us of an outbreak. And then the second one, certificated assignment, we chose to bring that because that really is some substantial change in how HR needs to be tracking and reporting certificated employees. And one of the primary functions of policy is to give guidance to staff in a document that they can refer back to, and they know how to inform their work. So that was another reason we brought forward this one. And you will probably see several more, probably not at the next board meeting, but after that being introduced for first reading.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see if it's okay with everybody, if there's public comment on either of these policies, and then we can get into our discussion.
Yes, there is one hand raised at this time. Mr. Chairman, 2 minutes.
That sounds great.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. I'm going to call on Diana Pang. Diana? Her hand is raised. Diana
Yeah,
Pang?
she's muted. I don't know, Diana, if you can unmute, or if maybe we need to ask her to unmute. I don't know how that works.
Ms. Pang? So I can't unmute her, but
I can't unmute her either.
yeah.
I can't tell if she's actually there. Michelle, were you able to unmute yourself when you spoke earlier?
Yes, I was, and I can still
Great.
do it.
And you're
But
doing it now.
I received a little, yeah, I had a little box that popped up.
Oh, it asked you if you wanted to unmute? Okay, well, maybe Diane, I don't know, maybe Diana's not there.
Yeah, see, I can't unmute her.
I don't know, maybe we should just go on and then
Yes.
hold over. If she is able to unmute, we can go to public comment at that. Oh, wait, Diana, can you hear us?
Oh my gosh.
Can you hear us?
Diana?
Commissioner Alexander and fellow commissioners, I apologize. I am getting my COVID test right now. I have no comment. It was a butt dial.
Oh,
Okay, no worries, no problem at all.
Okay.
We just wanted to make sure that if you did want to comment, that you were able to. So I'd rather err on the side of that. So thank you, and I hope the test goes okay. All right, so it sounds like we don't have public comment. So commissioners, do you have comments or questions on either of these policies? Maybe not. I'm wondering, I do have a question on the, so the infectious disease one sounds like it's basically the CSBA model policy. Can you talk a little bit more, General Counsel Houck, about the personnel assignment one and where that's coming from? Is that also from CSBA?
Yes. So unless it's trying to think in recent years if we've ever had, so we did do professional boundaries before CSBA had a model. Now they do. Our undocumented student resolution was SFUSD specific. CSBA didn't have a model for that, but those are rare exceptions. Almost always these are coming from CSBA's model recommendations. So definitely that is the case with these two. And I'm just looking to see. So in 2019, the legislature adopted a new law that requires annual monitoring of the assignment of certificated employees and requires CTC to administer a statewide system with an annual data file. So districts have to submit their evidence into this data file. So there's a fair amount of administrative work on the back end as a result of this law. We also have to report misassignments in our school accountability report card. And of course, we use our Williams complaint procedures for any complaints regarding misassignment. So again, what prompted us to bring this forward is the change in the law, but also just needing to anchor HR in their work to this new requirement that we track misassignments and we use the state reporting system.
And what is, I would love to hear from HR and like, what is HR saying about this and what are site leaders saying about this? Because I guess part of, I asked this as a former principal who, I mean, this is a very important question. And I guess I don't want to, I guess my concern around this is there actually are exceptions, including exceptions in state law around credential authorizations. And so I don't want to put in policy something that ties our hands in a way that's unnecessary. So for example, just to put my questions out there, like I was surprised that there's no mention of the alternative schools of choice legislation in the provision around waivers for credentials, which I know is something that we've used in the past. So I would just, yeah, I'm just curious, like, is this actually changing HR's practice? I would like to know what HR is feeling about it and whether there's, yeah, how site leaders are experiencing it.
Yeah, so obviously I can't answer that for you. I can answer though the example you gave. We would not consider that a misassignment. So what this doesn't change the analysis of assignment as much as it puts a requirement on us to report in a different way. And I also don't think site leaders, this would not be their responsibility. This is really HR's responsibility to track assignments and credentials and to make the reporting to the state. But it doesn't require us to, it doesn't change our analysis of how we determine whether or not somebody is appropriately assigned.
So I guess I don't understand what it's changing then.
So it requires, we now are required to report in a different way our misassignments to the state. So we have to monitor the assignment and report it to CTC in an annual data file, which is not the way we have done it in the past. And it also requires schools to report the misassignment on their school. Well, it requires districts to report it on the school's accountability report card. So
what's our current policy? I guess what's weird is that this doesn't, but you're saying this is a new policy.
Right. So we, in most instances where I bring a new policy to you, it's not as if the district's never been complying with the law. We have a practice, right, that one hopes is legally compliant. It's just that we've never documented it in a policy anywhere. So in this case, the reporting is different, but HR has always been required to track and monitor. And I mean, you probably, hopefully not, but it's likely as a site leader, you got a notice that you had a misassignment and that we had to make a change as a result of that. So it's not common, but we do have to do it.
Yeah, I personally, I actually would like, I'm not comfortable approving this without understanding the sort of what the implications are in terms of that process and what HR is changing or not changing. And again, I'm sorry we weren't able to communicate last week, but that was one of the things I was going to ask about last week, was could we bring somebody from HR to this meeting to try to, because at least for me, like I want to understand, I think it's really important that we have policies that are in compliance with state law, and I want to make sure that we're actually doing them, and that we're writing them in the way that we need to do them, right? So that, because I think your point around like guiding staff is really, really good and important. And so I guess I take it seriously, like what we're writing here, and just want to make sure we're writing it well and properly. And it makes me uncomfortable approving this one in particular. The infectious disease one makes sense to me, but this one, because it actually directly relates to the assignment of staff, I would like to hear from HR about how this process works. And frankly, even maybe from site leaders who've experienced this, to see, are there issues with it? Is it working? Is it not working? Before we codify a policy.
Yeah, so I'm happy to, we can put this over for the next rules committee and invite the person responsible in HR for tracking assignments. I think that's probably going to be Jen Douglas, and reporting on them. I'm not really sure how to get principal perspective on that. So that, you know, and I'm not sure that principal perspective would inform your policy, because the policy is the legal requirement, but it may well inform how HR implements the policy. So, but we could ask, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that, Commissioner?
Yeah, we could ask UA maybe, I don't know. I'm happy to work on that. Again, like I don't want to create more work for people. I guess I just want to make sure that we're, and I'm also happy to do some of this, like if no other commissioners have issues with this, I'm happy to do some legwork outside of the meeting and then report back at the next meeting, you know, in public, oh, we had this conversation. I would just love an opportunity to actually talk to some folks about it, and make sure that this policy is something that's working for the folks in the schools.
So I think, you know, if your other committee members agree, what probably makes sense is to put this on for your next rules committee. And in the meantime, we can set you up with Jen Douglas and maybe, or whoever in HR, I think it's her, whoever in HR is responsible. And then based on that conversation, maybe you can decide, you know, if you want to have HR come back to the next rules committee, or if you just want to report.
Is that okay, Commissioner Lamb, or do you have thoughts on this?
No, that sounds good. I think having a little bit more context from HR would be great, as well as, you know, what your findings in the next couple of weeks will be.
Okay, thanks, General Counsel Houck, for that suggestion. I appreciate it. So other discussion before we try to move forward on these, or on the infectious disease one, I guess? No? Okay, great. So I think, are we gonna try to move?
Yes, we need a motion and a second.
So moved for a positive recommendation for the infectious disease.
Second.
Thank you.
And it seems like we have general consent that that is
You
moving
do.
forward with a positive recommendation.
Yes.
Great. And the other one, we will hold over as suggested, and I will report back. And if you have other, or Commissioner Lamb or Commissioner Bogus, if anyone has specific questions about that, please forward them my way, and then I can make a public report at the next meeting.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other comments before we close?
So I had a just a comment. I know that things sound to be kind of slowed down right now, stalled a bit in Sacramento. I know it's short term for the next couple of weeks, but just, you know, for staff, for, you know, Michael, that really wanting to understand this, you know, the road map ahead, either it be bill cleanup, budget cleanup, the second half of this, you know, as we go into the legislative session, like, you know, what does this mean with COVID, you know, here? I think overall LEAs across the state, you know, have been in communication pretty regularly with SBA, with our colleagues. And I just think as, you know, Abe kind of alluded to, like, oh, this, you know, either the executive branch administration or the state legislature didn't anticipate. So I think if that is a perspective and tone that's coming from Sacramento, can you imagine what LEAs are dealing and handling? So I really, you know, encourage, and I've said this, I think pretty consistently, either both here in this committee, but also in budget business services, like however we as one of the largest urban school districts can be vocal about, particularly around COVID, you know, recovery, implementation, operations, to even formalize that, even if it's in writing, or even maybe like, for example, in our networks right now at CSBA, I think folks are finding it really helpful, because when we can share, like, this is right now what we're experiencing, this is how we're leveraging our relationships, let's say at the city, or even with our county, you know, Department of Public Health, and being able to really problem solve with one another, so that we don't feel as districts we're kind of like holding this, because it is a lot when we're holding both on the instruction side, the education recovery side, and then on the public health side. So I just wanted to name that specifically, because I just feel like LEA school districts are just right now, you know, really being compounded with the ongoing of this pandemic, and who knows how it will evolve over time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, we have plenty of opportunities for input that come our way through various groups that represent local school districts. And, you know, for example, we're being asked to weigh in right now at the federal level on the reconciliation bill and Representative Scott's bill on construction for schools and the, you know, reopening and things that need to happen. So that's something that'll be going out to Speaker Pelosi's office this week. And, you know, we will let you know about the other opportunities as they come up, so that you can make sure you see that we are weighing in on.
Great, and that's a really good point, Commissioner Lamb. And I think also feel free to let us know if you want us as board members to speak up or weigh in on those things, because I think that's one place where we, you know, can support that work as well. All right, thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate Ms. Houck, Mr. Davis, Ms. Casco, Ms. Lenoff, my fellow commissioners for this very efficient meeting. And we are hereby adjourned.
Good night.
Thank you. Good evening.
You.